So now that we've curated the data, how would we go about building data services on top of our hub?
Well, I noticed that MarkLogic offers several options for developers to build services. And since I'm a JavaScript developer, I prefer that approach. So I would use JavaScript to build the data services that would allow our customers to meet their business needs.
All right then, let's see how we can use some JavaScript programming to access data from our hub. Okay, so we're going to go through a couple simple examples of getting data out of our hub using JavaScript programming in line with those business requirements that we've been looking at for this example project. So to follow along at home, if you go out and you look at the material that you've downloaded from the MarkLogic University GitHub site, you'll notice that there's a folder here called Code, and inside of there, there's a folder called Workspace. And inside of there, there's an XML document, access.xml. We're going to use a tool in MarkLogic called Query Console, and we're going to import this workspace, which has a couple of these examples already packaged up for us to go through. So if you haven't worked with Query Console before, go ahead and open up a new browser tab, and let's go out to localhost 8000. And you're going to have to authenticate, so let's use your admin credentials and log in. And here you're going to see the Query Console tool. Now, Query Console provides you with an interface to write and run ad hoc queries against a database. And you can export your queries and share that with your developer colleagues. And likewise, you can import workspaces as well. And that's what we're going to do here right now. So go over to the left-hand side where you see Workspace and this little down arrow. Go ahead and click that down arrow and scroll down and choose Import Workspace. And then you're going to go out and find that location on your file system, which for me is out on my desktop in my Developer Start folder under Code and Workspace. So go ahead and grab that file and bring it in. And then click the Import button. Okay, so here we've got just a few examples that we're going to look at. The first example is using a JavaScript API in MarkLogic called JSearch or JavaScript Search. And it's a really powerful API that you can use to take advantage of the built-in search engine that comes with the MarkLogic Data Hub. And so this API makes it really easy as a developer to create Google-like search applications with that type of interface that people know and expect from using web search type of tools. And one of the capabilities in this search API is to simply take a string that the user provides with out-of-the-box understood search grammar and apply that search query and bring back a summary of the results set. And that's what we're doing here. If you look at this code, you'll see that first off, there's just a little JavaScript conditional statement to make sure you're running this against your final database for your hub, because that's where our curated data is, and that's what we want to be accessing when we build our data services. Then when you look at the actual search logic, you'll see that we're importing the JSearch library so that we can use it. Then we're defining a string, which you could imagine is being provided by the user interface. And you'll notice that in that string, we're saying Microsoft or Amazon. The Search API understands a Google-like search grammar right out of the box. So and, or, not, all that type of standard grammar is understood. You don't have to program for that. Next, what we see is constraining our search based on collections. It's always a good idea when searching over a large data hub to constrain it as much as possible. We've got those collections in there, so that's a good way to constrain it right from the get-go. Then we're executing our query. We're defining it with where, and we are taking that search string that the user provided and we're parsing it. And then we're going to get the results back, but we don't want all the results. We're specifically saying to just give us a custom result set, starting with the first result, 0, and then the next 5 results. And because search works on a relevancy-based algorithm, what we'll be looking at here on this first page of results, because there could be more than 5 in the total results set, is the 5 most relevant. And then we bring back the result. So let's go ahead and run this, and you can see that what actually gets returned to us is a summary of the results set. If I look at the result and compress it, I can see that we had 2 matches, which kind of makes sense based on our query, Microsoft or Amazon. And the first match is Microsoft. And what we get is a summary of that. So we get some information about the score from the relevancy algorithm. We see the contents of the document, and you'll note that it's the full enveloped document in this example. And we see that same thing for Amazon. So that's a very simple example of search. Let's take a look at our next example of search, and that's on the second tab here, and it's called Range Search. Remember, we had a business requirement to be able to do things like query against ranges like profit margin range or revenue range and so on. So in this example, we've got a very specific ask that we're going to make of our data hub. We want to return at most 5 matches. We don't want to return the entire envelope document. We want to return only the instance data. And we want to only look at companies. And we want to be constraining those companies to those that have revenues between $80 billion and $1 trillion. So really, really big companies in the Fortune 500. We can implement that based on our curated data. And if we explore the code, you'll see that just like before, we import the JSearch library. We have our condition to make sure we're running this against our final database. We constrain our search to the company collection. And then you see that our where constraint is a little bit different. Instead of accepting a string as the query, we are doing more of a structured query where we are providing an example of a document structure, and we want to find matches like it. And we are joining 2 conditions with AND logic. And those conditions express that we want the total revenue property to be less than or equal to 100,000. And if you looked at my note up here, what that really means is 1 trillion, but based on the way this data is modeled. And then greater than or equal to 80,000, which really means 80 billion, according to our logic. And then we express that we want a slice of the data, so not necessarily every match in our summary, but only 10. And then with the map, we're expressing what exactly we want extracted from the matching documents. Rather than bring back the entire thing, in this case, we're now only going to bring back the company instance data from our enveloped document. And then we bring back the results. So let's go ahead and run this. And we can see our results coming back here. And we've got companies like Microsoft, Anthem, Home Depot. And if we're curious, how many result sets do we have in total? We could look at the very end of this summary, and we see that the estimate here, this is telling us, based on our index calculation, how many matches we have. And in this case, we have 9. All right, let's take a look at the next example on the tab titled Geospatial Search. Now, in order to do Geospatial Search, we need to provide our data hub with a geospatial index, and so let's deploy that first. So if you go back out to the folder data that you've cloned from the MarkLogic University GitHub site, you might notice that there's a folder called config. And inside of that folder, we see a JSON document. This represents the final database in our hub and all the indexes that we want deployed for our entity type data. So if you look at that in a text editor, you can see that it's got all the range indexes which we configured for our entity, as well as this new geospatial index that is designed to fit the shape of geospatial data that we created in our hub. Everything is under the parent property called company with a property called latitude and a property called longitude. Now what we need to do is deploy this configuration to our hub. And we can do so if we look at our actual hub folder here and then take a look at the source folder and go into main, entity config, and then databases, we can see the existing database configuration on our hub. And if we look at that JSON document in a text editor, you'll see that it is missing the geospatial index. That's because we haven't deployed it yet. We're about to do that. So what we need to do is copy this updated version of finaldatabase.json, which has the indexes that we want, and paste that into our data hub. And I'm going to replace that. And now I've got a new version of Final Database that has all of those existing range indexes modeled plus the geospatial index modeled. Now we just need to tell ML Gradle, which is the configuration and deployment automation that's part of the MarkLogic Data Hub, to redeploy our hub with those new indexes. And we can actually do that right through the Quick Start interface. So let's go back to our browser and go over here to Data Hub Quick Start, and let's go to the Settings tab. And if it's been a while, like it has for me, you're going to have to re-authenticate. So go ahead and choose Next, pick your environment, and log back in to Quick Start. Then over here on our Data Hub settings, you'll see that there's an option to redeploy the hub, and it will redeploy based on the current configurations that are defined in our hub. And since we updated that, it will redeploy those latest index configs. So let's click redeploy, confirm it, and let it go through and do that redeployment. And now that our redeploy of our hub is complete, we should now have the geospatial index applied to our final database, and we can go back to Query Console and take a look at the search that we're going to be doing here in this example. So let's study this code, and you'll see that we're still using JSearch, and now we are defining a structured query to do a geospatial search based on a region that we define. And MarkLogic has support for a lot of geospatial search capabilities. You can define polygon shapes and squares and rectangles, and in this case, we're defining a circle region based on a defined center point and with a specified radius. And if we translate what this query means, we are looking at roughly the center of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and a 25-mile radius around that area, and we're looking for company documents that fall within that region, which could span beyond the state, right? If you think about Philadelphia, it's close to New York, and so there's a lot of options there in this query. It is not very cut and dry like a query that says look for documents with a state equal to Pennsylvania. It is a true region query based on where those places are located in the world. So now that we have our index, we can go ahead and run this query. And you'll see if we scroll through the results set and look at those, that we get companies like DuPont, and that is in Delaware, which is really close to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We get Universal Health Services, which is in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. We get Aramark, which is in Philly. So you can see our geospatial criteria is being applied. It's a very powerful way to search. It lets you build mapping type applications and so forth with your MarkLogic Data Hub. So we've looked at a few examples of search. This is just barely scratching the surface. There's so much that you can do as you start to build data services on your hub. And those are the type of things that you're going to learn about and explore in more depth when you go through your developer learning track. So now that we've been through a complete iteration of ingesting, curating, and accessing data with the MarkLogic Data Hub, come with me, and in the next video we'll talk a little bit more about deployment.